No. Hi, everybody. I'm Saralee Greenberg Sloven, and I'm sitting in the living room of my granddaughter, Oriti Guttmacher-Levy. And Orit has asked me to share a little bit of my life with you. So settle in, and I'll begin at a very early age. I was born in 1925 in a little town in North Dakota called Grafton. My dad was an attorney, my mother was a mother and a community worker. And from an early age, I knew that I was expected to marry Jewish. Now, this was really not anything pressing. I was young. There were no other Jewish families around, but even so, the thought, the pressure was I would marry Jewish. Now, where this Jewish man would come from or appear, it wasn't part of anything I was concerned about. I knew some way or other it would just happen. I had the usual childhood, very carefree in this little town, and then for college I went to the U of North Dakota, and it was during wartime, so there were no men there to interact with, and certainly no Jewish men. After a year at the U of North Dakota, I transferred to the University of Minnesota. It was still wartime. There were no other men enrolled, and all the so-called eligible men were fighting in Europe or in the Pacific. No Jewish men there. So at the middle of my senior year, my parents previously, with my younger brother, who was at that time 12 years old, made this giant move from North Dakota to Los Angeles because my dad had suffered several heart attacks due to his having scarlet fever when he was younger, and my mother was suffering from a brain tumor that hadn't been diagnosed yet. But their decision was to make their life easier, so they moved to a warmer climate under doctor's orders, and there was family out in Los Angeles to help them along and to make life easier. As I said, I was at the University of North Dakota at the end of 1946, and I got the message from one of the aunties that my family out in LA was really, really suffering. And they were living with her, who was my dad's full sister, and she was not a well person. And she suggested I leave school, go out to Los Angeles, and be the main support of the family. So I heeded her advice, and at the end of 1946, I flew out to Los Angeles and became the cook, the housekeeper, the person to keep this small family of my mother and father and younger brother afloat. The thought was I may go into a university out in California, but that just didn't seem very possible. How I met Sid was through family. My first cousin, who was my mother's nephew, and his wife had just had a baby boy, and they were having a brit. And of course, the auntie and the uncle and me, the cousin, were invited to this brit. And at this brit, I met a young woman whose name was Charlotte Sloven Kamens, married to a Norman Kamens. Well, this was a family from North Dakota that my family knew through homesteading. And when I met Charlotte, she said to me, "Saralee, my brother is coming out for a holiday, and would you be interested in a blind date with him? I do not know if he knows any young women out here, but if he's interested in dating, can my brother, Sid, call on you?" It was a message from heaven almost, and I just jumped at it because I was very, very isolated, living with my parents. So it just took a few more days, and I got this phone call, and it was for Charlotte, who introduced her brother, Sid Sloven, over the telephone to me, and would I be interested in a date the next night. So yes, I was very, very interested. So I had to take a bus downtown. The arrangement was I would take a bus, I would stand in front of this restaurant, and Charlotte and her husband Norman would drive up, and they would not only have Sid in the car, but they would have a companion of Sid's who had a wriggler who had also traveled out to California. So there I am, standing in front of this hotel, kind of waiting for what the future would bring, and this car drives up, and there's two young men sitting in the back, and I'm thinking to myself, I wonder which one is Sid Sloven. I wonder which one is my date. Well, I enter the car, and we go to a bar. It was called the Bar Music, and we had a drink, and we had a dance, and Sid and I danced. I remember he was in a brown suit that I thought needed pressing. It was all baggy. We danced. It wasn't really an enjoyable dance for either one of us. He didn't seem to be impressed by me. I didn't seem to be impressed by him. And when I was deposited back home, I wasn't really enthusiastic about the evening. Well, it just took a day or two, and Sid called me up, and he suggested we go to the beach. And that sounded good to me, and we went to the beach, and we clicked, and we could relax. We enjoyed the encounter, and the third date, I don't remember what we did, but the memorable part of the third date was, in those days, you didn't kiss your date until you had been with him for 3 dates. So when Sid took me home, then was the opportunity to us to exchange a kiss. And as we were standing in our living room and we were exchanging this first kiss, I knew immediately this was a young Jewish man that would become my husband. It was just very, very apparent. It's like the Bible story where you see the handwriting on the wall. Well, that's what I did. I saw the handwriting on the wall. Well, Sid was still in business, working for his father in Bismarck, North Dakota. So Sid's vacation was only 2 weeks out in LA, and during that time we saw each other, and we reached the mutual agreement, that we would be married, and we picked the month of October.